In this video, we're going to go on and talk about some other potential biological factors. In the last video, we talked about the contribution of genetics. Now, it's important to understand that mental illness really results from a combination of biological predisposition, whether it's genetics or something else that we're going to talk about in this video, and your experiences. Both play an important role. So in this video, we'll discuss the possible role of hormones in depression and also talk about some hemispheric differences seen in depression. So hormones. We talked about hormones back in the reproduction chapter. And while your book does go on and talk about a number of other things, I've limited it down just to hold you responsible for a few of these things. And one of them is hormones. And so think about how hormones influence us. And when's a time, especially for a female, that hormones kind of go awry and one type of depression sets in, a specific type of depression sets in. And that's postpartum depression. So postpartum depression is depression after giving birth. It's more common among women that have actually had depression previously. Also, having postpartum depression also makes it more likely that you'll get depression later on in life. It appears to be involved with that drop in hormones that happens after giving birth. So, we talked about a little bit about how, if that sperm and that egg come together and is fertilized, and once that implants, those estrogen and progesterone levels continue to rise throughout pregnancy, and in order to support that developing fetus. And so when a woman gives birth, our hormone levels are very, very high. And then shortly after giving birth, they plummet, they drop. So you have this huge drop in hormone levels. And so, that's one reason we think that postpartum depression happens in some individuals. Now, why it happens in some and not others is perhaps just the way our own bodies cope with that dropping hormone levels. I know for me personally, I get headaches when, it's a monthly thing, but then also after giving birth, I just had really bad, I could tell like they were hormone, almost like withdrawal headaches. It's also suggested that testosterone drop in men could be associated with an increased probability of depression as well. We also see changes in brain activity. So the changes we see is decreased activity in the left prefrontal cortex and increased activity in the right prefrontal cortex. Now, try to keep this straight. I know it's going to be a lot, but you have to remember that in previous years, I've talked about what's called the behavior activating and behavior inhibition system when we talked about stress and anxiety. I took it out and replaced it with some other things this semester. I had that in there previously because it talks about how typically our left prefrontal cortex is very active when we're thinking happy thoughts. And when we're willing to approach a situation and we're thinking happy thoughts, that left prefrontal cortex is typically happy. So it makes sense then that left prefrontal cortex would have a decreased in activity in someone who is depressed because they're not thinking those happy thoughts. So this is just here to remind you of where that prefrontal cortex is. Remember, it's part of that frontal lobe. It's in the very front of our brain, very much the anterior portion of our brain. It also, remember, makes up a larger percentage of our brains than other species. It's one of the things we think that makes us uniquely human, and it's got a lot of different functions. So again, just remembering that in the left prefrontal cortex, people who have major depressive disorder have a decreased activity in the left prefrontal cortex and an increased activity in the right prefrontal cortex.